everybody, and welcome to another incredible conversation around You Are the Medicine. Today we have a beautiful woman that I met through a mutual group inside of feminine entrepreneurship and leadership. And I'm excited to talk about this topic because she is a burnout and stress specialist. Now, when have you ever felt stressed? Oh my gosh, me, it's all the bloody time. How do we manage it? I've definitely experienced my own burnout. I've definitely experienced hitting a wall, and I know a lot of my friends and clients have too. And Emma, your work is really inspiring. The way that you are able to share what is happening inside of the body, inside of the mind, inside of the environment really resonates with me. It makes me feel calm, and it also really helps me understand what I'm going through at the moment and what I have been through as well. So I thank you massively for being here today, and I look forward to this conversation. Everybody welcome Emma Matthews.
Oh, thank you so much. I was very excited to have this conversation with you. It's been really great meeting you recently.
Yay! So the idea of these conversations is you are the medicine. You know, it's a word that's been bandied around a lot and has lots of different connotations. But essentially, what I see in my work is that a lot of people move through this trajectory in their life that they come from wounds to wisdom to wealth. And we can shift that into essentially being our conditioning creates a certain response or result. And through awareness, we can come to either an idea that we get to shift that, and we can then move into what we can term as wealth, whether that's monetary or whether it's, you know, incredible relationships with others and with yourself. Or we can hit a wall, and that can really cause what you were talking about to me when we first met, that burnout, that stress. And I feel like a lot of us in particularly kind of like our 30s and 40s and older also, that have come through the corporate route, come through that train, come through that hamster wheel, have at some point, if not right now, particularly with the current climate, hitting this space where there's got to be something else.
Yeah.
So I'd love it if you could take us into your personal journey with this and how, you know, where did you begin? What was little Emma like? And how did she end up at that wall?
Yeah, gosh, good question. So little Emma put quite a lot of pressure on herself. So at a young age, I have this memory of being told at school that we were a year behind because we'd had this year of substitute teachers and no one had really looked out for our progress. So kind of 6-7-year-old me suddenly was like, ooh, I can't rely on adults to sort this stuff out. If I'm gonna succeed, whatever my definition of success at that age was, I'm gonna have to play quite an active role in this. And I think that really fueled me then in a school system that was all about grades and achievement to really push myself quite hard from a young age. So I remember getting kind of quite stressed about exams, but I always did quite well. And I remember always being not exactly envious, but just wishing like I knew what I wanted to do when I grew up in a way that some of my friends did. But I never really had that sense when I was younger. I think I had the entrepreneurial bug, but at that point I thought to have your own business, you had to invent the next Dyson, kind of it had to be this product thing. So I kind of dismissed that, followed the academic route of kind of being in a school that really cared about grades, good university, good career, and kind of fast forward a few years, found myself in banking after having studied economics, just because, well, in the absence of knowing what you want to do, you might as well get well paid for it, was where my mind was at. So I thought, I'll just figure it out once I'm in my career. But then, of course, you get sucked into it. So I joined a graduate scheme with a global bank that was very much, let's put you far away from where you grew up, chuck you into a sink or swim environment. So from quite a young age, I was kind of running a branch and then going to various different projects learning a huge amount, but I think I really became disconnected with who I was, what I wanted from life. So fast forward another decade, I had risen up the ranks because that was my measure of success. Kind of, yeah, you get more senior, and I'd had to really fight to get promoted. I was typically younger in quite a male-dominated environment, which definitely had an impact. And yeah, just something you said around you suddenly find you're in a place that's kind of not right for you. I remember that the earliest signs, I think, for me with burnout were I was waking up with this sense of, is this all there is? Which at the time I couldn't quite reconcile, because I was senior in a bank, salary was great, on paper lifestyle was great, but internally I just didn't feel good. And then I missed all the other warning signs that something was wrong. Was working all the hours under the sun in a really difficult working environment. And then one day I literally had what I now understand as a huge panic attack in the office, when my body was like, you've ignored me for so long that we're literally going to take you out of the game. So that was actually my last day in the office. I never went back after sick leave. It was a moment that felt like everything was falling apart, my life was over, but it actually opened up this brilliant new chapter of life once I worked my way through it.
Oh my gosh. I mean, you can visualize that happening, and I know there'll be so many people in our audience that are able to see themselves in that story somewhere along the line, like the recognition of being in a system, being good in the system, and then being like, well, what's the next step? Well, the next step is promotion, and then the next step is this, and the next step is that. And before you know it, you've got what you call, this material success on the outside. You said on paper, yeah, on paper, this is the route you take. Off you go. The houses, the cars, whatever it looks like to you, the promotion, if it's a family for you, if it's a, whatever it may be to you, and then you kind of get there. And for you personally, it was your body was like, no.
Yeah.
Talk to us about kind of then, because you said sick leave. What happened during that time? What were the thoughts that were occurring? What was the bodily symptoms, and what was happening for you?
Yeah, it felt like a complete shock that came out of the blue, but now with the benefit of hindsight, I can see that actually it grew over time. So I'd always been very sharp at making decisions, could prioritize easily, and I remember my head just starting to feel like cotton wool. I wasn't eating properly. I was living on caffeine towards the end. And so it was a Friday evening in the office that I had the huge panic attack. I literally thought I was dying, and somehow managed to get myself home. Then that weekend, I couldn't get out of bed. I was just shaking. I was crying. I couldn't string a sentence together. The Monday, I remember trying to open my laptop thinking I'll do some work from home, and I was physically sick. My body was just giving me that, no, don't even go here. And then by Tuesday, I was in the doctor's surgery being referred to a psychiatrist. It was scary, because I thought I was that person that coped really well, had my stuff together, but there's only so long that you can ignore everything your body and mind needs and expect it to keep working. So that's what I learned. But yeah, for many months I felt like a complete shell of a person. It was kind of everything I associated with my identity was gone. Work was my 24/7. That wasn't there anymore. I was crying all the time, whereas I think I'd learned to be quite robotic in banking. So suddenly there were these emotions, didn't know how to deal with them. I was seeing a psychiatrist, which at the time I associated with things that are just not true, but yeah, made that mean something. I was going to therapy, which I found very painful, couldn't really understand what we were doing. So essentially it was a incredibly difficult time. But I think what popped up is it was that moment where I could have just accepted that I was going to have this life of making do, and I don't know, maybe attempt to go back or find an easier corporate job. But part of me just thought, actually, something that painful has to mean something. And maybe if I kind of figure out how to get through this, maybe there's something better out the other side. And I think that was what really saved me and has created the foundation for what I have today.
How beautiful. And I really want to dive into that piece, because, you know, I think, like I said, there'll be a lot of people listening to this that can identify themselves in there. And that moment of that voidal space where you're questioning everything about yourself, you know, whether, you know, like for my journey, which is similar archetypally, but the moment where there's that wall and it is absolutely nowhere near, you can't go back. Yeah. And you're so used to walking that path that you attempt to go back. And it's, in hindsight, like you said, there's this beautiful wisdom, like, oh, of course I was meant to go down here. But you don't know that at the time. And the people that are in that at the moment, there's solace knowing that, yes, when you feel like it's falling apart, when, you know, the void starts to widen, you find yourself in a psychologist's office and you're like, I'm sane, I'm fine, I definitely don't need to be here, something's going wrong here. And there's those times where you just think, am I living my own life? What's happening? Yeah. And the self-belief that potentially was there before that, you know, took you up the ranks is now starting to question itself and turn in on itself. And that can take you into, you know, levels of depression, anxiety, etc. Did any of that touch you while you were in that voidal space?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges I faced at the time is I was really lucky that I had a company medical policy. So I got to see a psychiatrist, I got to see a therapist. But within that, nothing really truly helped me understand what had happened to me in a way that made sense for me. So in those days, there wasn't actually all the information there is out there around burnout. So it wasn't until I was kind of 3-4 months into the journey that I discovered that word and started to understand what I'd experienced. And so definitely for me, burnout presented as panic attacks, anxiety, which then built to depression, because I was in that space of, I don't really understand what's happening. I don't understand how to come out the other side. So it certainly made me realize, when you are that kind of type A high achiever, the gaps there are in burnout recovery support. I needed that person who could help me see the possibilities out the other side, to understand what had happened and actually see this as something that I could use as a catalyst rather than it feeling like an end. But thankfully I found that through some strange ways myself.
Well, we'll go into that, but I just want to kind of caveat that, you know, this is a relatively new area within the corporate structure, you know, because burnout wasn't, like you said, wasn't necessarily a word that was typically used, because potentially of the association of, you know, well, what does burnout mean? It means I'm not strong anymore. It means I'm not an A-type anymore. And let's be honest, go back into the structures of, you know, corporate UK, corporate America, corporate wherever you are, it is predominantly male, predominantly masculine. Although there are women within the ranks, essentially a lot of those women are presenting with a lot of masculine drive and a lot of masculine energy. And so to admit that you were in burnout could potentially present with everything that you believed about yourself being wrong. Yeah. And so for that to even be something inside of corporate is relatively rare anyway. So along comes Emma, who experiences this experience. How did you then discover that what you were experiencing was burnout?
So I must have spent hours Googling, trying to understand what had happened to me. And I think, yeah, so from a kind of psychiatrist perspective, they were talking about anxiety and then depression. And just intuitively, I knew there was something missing in the picture for me. And I eventually came across Arianna Huffington's story online, and she was the first person that talked about a similar experience that just felt like, oh, this is somewhat what I've experienced. And yeah, it was just the most validating moment for me. And I saw how she turned that into a positive in her life, where she'd kind of collapsed at the Huffington Post, knocked herself out, and then been on the whole journey with Thrive and kind of the well-being piece. And I was like, oh, okay, successful woman, turn this around. Maybe there is some hope for me.
So give us some of those pointers then. You said, oh, I could see that, you know, I could resonate somewhat with her story. What parts of your story, what were the things that were just going ping, ping, ping for you?
Yeah, so it was where she was talking about just this kind of level of physical and emotional exhaustion, because what I was experiencing was not like a tiredness that a good night's sleep, weeks out of work seemed to be taking the edge off. It was almost like my life force had been drained out of me, and I couldn't see a way out of it. It just felt like it was something that was permanent and that I'd broken in the process. And she talked about the kind of the distance that she had between herself and her job, whereas it had been that thing that was she put so much into, and then suddenly she was feeling really distant, skeptical, pessimistic about it. And I was like, yeah, I was that person that gave it everything, and now suddenly I don't know, I'm just wanting to run away from it, like it's this dangerous thing that's gonna eat me. And then she talked about how she'd become less and less efficient over time, which started to ring some bells with actually what I'd seen with me. It was taking me longer and longer to do the same amount of things, which then in a context of having too much to do, not enough hours in the day, just, yeah, it was always going to happen at some point. So yeah, that's what I saw in myself.
It's crazy, isn't it? Because, you know, we look back, let's go, you know, to 30s and 40s and, you know, and even into 50s and 60s, really, there was this energy of, you know, women would be at home with their children, and there was this very, very defined sort of male and female role. And do you now see, particularly in your work, and have you experienced that more women going into the workplace, more, because it's normal for us, but yet only 20, 30, 40 years ago, it wasn't necessarily that normal. Going into the workplace and finding that they're putting their all into that space, only to find that, like you said, that the life force is being pulled out of them in a way because potentially they're not in the right environment, or they're not in the right the environment. Yeah, what do you see around that in your experience?
Yeah, it seems that burnout happens when you've got the perfect storm of someone with particular character traits in an environment where there are risk factors for burnout. So it might be kind of unrealistic workload, or a kind of values mismatch situation where you've got a kind of kind, caring person who's then in an environment that's really brutal, for example, or there's just not a lot of support. There can be a lot of things in the picture. And one of my biggest gripes with the kind of research around burnout is it mostly just focuses on the environment, or maybe there's a bit about the person, and then it misses actually their ecosystem outside of work. If you've got the kind of person predisposed to burnout for whatever reason in the culture, then with kids and lots of demands at home, it's no wonder it doesn't work. Yeah.
So bring us to this light bulb moment again then. So, oh my gosh, I think I've got burnout.
Mm-hmm.
What happens then? Like where did you start to move from, you know, that space? Because essentially, you mentioned it yourself, what you're creating right now, what you're in right now, has been born of that kernel.
Yeah.
So take us on that journey.
Yeah, so this would have been, I burned out towards the end of 2017. That was when my kind of eruption happened. So this would take us to early 2018 now. And at that point, if there was something similar to what I do in my business, I didn't find it. I didn't find the kind of burnout coach or burnout therapist. So it was actually listening to my intuition to a degree, because there wasn't the kind of how to recover from this online in the way there is now. So I found myself being attracted to randomly a sales course online, which, considering I was in banking, it made no sense. But I think what I was seeing was a kind of, I don't know, just intuitively a route to finding out about how to get my brain on side. So that for me came in a sales program, but it was a lot about mindset and actually just how much ability we have to work on that, to decide what we want, to work on our thoughts. So that was my first kind of foray into that world. I'd never heard of Tony Robbins or any of the people who were quite famous around mindset. So I went into that program, and then I saw a route to actually developing some income streams outside of the corporate world. So that probably gave me the confidence to go, actually, I know I can't go back there, because I haven't changed who I am. And I know that environment hasn't changed. So the same thing's going to happen again. So yeah, I started building a business, and just, for me, it was very much a journey of trial and error, because I didn't have that mentor supporting me along the way. So initially I ended up building a business very much in the same energy of the corporate world. I kind of was listening to the masculine systems, that it must be done this way. And I took some step backwards in my recovery, but each time I was learning. And then eventually I cracked it and was like, oh, okay, I need to define what success means for me and take amazing care of myself in the process. Because actually, ultimately, I know I can succeed at tasks and building things. The bit that I hadn't mastered at that point was, how do I prioritize me and make sure that kind of my mind and body is getting the same attention as what I'm working on. So that was huge for me.
It's huge for all of us, isn't it? When you say it like that, it's like, oh my gosh, how do I prioritize me? Hold on, who's me? I thought I'm a cog in a wheel. I'm creating something out there. I'm in a system. I am my work. Then who am I if I'm not my work? Who am I if I'm not in that system, not getting my recognition, not getting my payment from there, not getting my stars and stripes and my yay pat on the back. So you start to see, oh my gosh, Emma needs taking care of. And how? What do I do? I think there's a lot of women in this audience that are going to really resonate with that piece. Okay, I know I need to take care of myself, but how? So there's two strands here that I want us to explore, which is the how did you look after yourself and what was that journey like? And when you say, and I started building a business, what was that business? Was that business inside of this recovery, or was it something separate that formed a vehicle for you to continue to recover?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. Okay, where to start with that one? Maybe if we start with the how. And to be frank, I think that's going to be a lifelong journey for me, because what I've realized is what I do for me needs to shift as my business grows, as I kind of am holding more people in my energy. So it's been this constant evolution for me of kind of first learning to listen to what my needs are. So at the point I burned out, I wasn't ever someone that talked about feelings. I had no sense of my mind-body connection. So things like going to yoga were frankly terrifying for me, because suddenly there was this space where I noticed how busy my thoughts were, and it was all really difficult for me to kind of start to understand what it felt like in different parts of my body, what that was telling me. But I knew I had to do it. And the analogy that really helped me was actually thinking about athletes and noticing the similarity to kind of the high performing CEO, female CEO kind of piece, because actually athletes are unapologetic about, you need to be eating right, sleeping right, you have a coach, you have a physio, and that's what gets you to the medal stand. Whereas for me, I was getting injured along the way and taking a step backwards. So I was like, okay, this is in many ways more important than physically what I'm doing, because actually when I'm not taking care of myself, that's going to put a brake on things. So over time, I just developed the belief system that I have to put me first. And that's what enables me to grow this successful business, to have energy to share with other people. But it took time to get there. But yeah, I made so many mistakes along the way that I was like, okay, I'm joining the dots here. And the common factor is I haven't tapped into what I need and listened to my body and met my needs first. And I think what created a huge shift for me was finding some ways to build some structure around that, because I was such a structured person in the corporate world. So things like having a dog meant that actually I was going out for a walk in nature twice a day, and that was life-changing for me.
Wow.
So in the early days, finding things that almost forced me to do things before it became more natural to do it just because it's for me, and that's a good thing in itself.
Wow, I think a lot of people will resonate around that as well. And I've got a few friends that have actually done exactly that, gone and got themselves an animal to look after, because not only is that companionship, but it forces them. It's almost like this self-hack when you know you've got to do something, but it's not natural. Well, actually, it is natural, but it's not natural for them or for you in that moment. It's really powerful actually to be able to see that in yourself, that I know what I need to do, but there's a gap between me wanting to do that with joy and aplomb, and actually getting there. And there's that Rubicon, isn't there? And I think that's something that we're all facing in our personal development. As we grow, there's always that little gap that we get to bridge. And that comes with the self-awareness. So I'm interested to see, again, what was the business idea in the beginning that kind of started taking you on that thread to that, deeper self-awareness over and over again?
Yeah, so going back to January 2018, I saw these adverts online for this sales program that made no sense why I was signing up for it, but there was something in it for me that I just felt connected with. So trusted it, invested in that. And it was a huge confidence builder for me. I guess a lot of the mindset work around sales is actually similar in some ways to work you do to boost your confidence and to understand people. So sales was never really my thing that I wanted to specialize in, but actually it gave me a route to doing something that worked with where I was in recovery, because it took me quite a long time for my kind of ability to write, do maths and things like that to come fully back.
Wow.
But what came back sooner was the ability to kind of talk and connect with people. So very early days, I found this opportunity to do kind of discovery calls for other businesses, and I loved it. For me, it was like, oh, I'm coaching people. Yeah, I didn't have that responsibility then for kind of holding them as they went through their journey. It was like, but we had a really meaningful interaction. And that was the moment that I was like, I love working with people, and I'd forgotten that. And I look back on my corporate career and thought, actually, there was a point that I was thinking about moving into HR, and the things that always brought me the most joy were my team development things. So yeah, it planted the seed there that then opened up my journey to actually train pretty much in all of the modalities that over the years ended up helping me and bringing them together holistically. So for other people, I could do the whole, well, here's a map. Of course, we need to lean into what's the right elements for you, but essentially there is a process to recovering from burnout, which would have been life-changing for me at the time.
this, I mean, even the language that you're using, you know, it's a recovery. And it brings to mind, like, what are we recovering from? You know, and when we talk about burnout, what has burnt out? And, you know, in
Yeah.
my work, very much it's the nervous system is this electrical system. And you can see it in your own electrics when a fuse blows, or, you know, when a filament in the light goes, it's, you know, it's actually burnt out. And I see that similarity. How do you describe actual burnout in the body, and what is the recovery? You know, talk to us about what you do with those people that come to you and
Yeah.
recover.
Yeah, essentially, it's going back to the basics of who you are and what you want from life, because something in that picture has got out of sync to get to the point of burnout. So typically, the first step is kind of some reassurance that you can come out the other side, because early days of it, it's frightening. You don't feel like yourself at all, and you need that thing that gives you the hope that you can come out the other side, which is why I've been so passionate about building communities of people at different points in the journey, so you can see, oh, there's all these people that actually this has turned into a positive for, rather than this is the end of everything. So that kind of reassurance piece, and then actually the understanding of why it's happened, I think is really, really important, and is quite often missed in the medical process or the traditional cognitive behavior therapy process. And for the kinds of clients I work with, they need to understand why, to then build the self-trust that actually this is not going to happen again, because I really understand it and I've made changes. And there can be different reasons why it's happened for different people. It's normally a combination of factors. And then we'll work together to look at, okay, what are the factors that led to this from within me, understanding those, deciding what they want to change, if anything, and then looking at the environmental factors. What we know for this to be a kind of sustainable piece is typically the best thing is I'm doing some work on me that's ecologically right. So maybe I'm prioritizing my needs, setting better boundaries, and there's a shift in the environment that I'm working in. If we're only doing one of those things, it doesn't work. So I'm always nervous if someone kind of wants to change themselves to fit in with a toxic environment. That's not good over the longer term.
So do you see a lot of people when they come to you presenting with, well, first of all, do they know they're in burnout? You know, have they been on a process that now they identify that language?
Yeah, I think that's how they find me typically, because I've been Googling around the topic and then come across my content. And it's an interesting one because it's not technically a medical diagnosis, but still it resonates with a lot of people for describing the journey in a way that anxiety, depression doesn't feel like the full picture for them.
So when you mentioned, you know, the person and the environment, and you know, looking at the archetypal journey of the human as the, you know, we walk through and unveil ourselves more and more as we get to know ourselves more and more, and we meet these Rubicons where we know we're in an environment that we think we're thriving in, then we feel like it's not quite right, we think it's us. And then all of a sudden we realize that, like you said, it's actually a combination of how we've grown, potentially the environment hasn't grown, or it has shifted and changed to meet our needs, and vice versa. Do a lot of these people then change, as in change their job? Mm-hmm. Do they leave their environments? Do they go on to create their own? Because the environment that we see around us, although changing, there are big conversations happening in the corporate sphere, is still such a juggernaut that it is not necessarily changing as swiftly as our awareness of ourselves is changing.
Yeah. And yeah, so in my experience, it's really varied. And I work with quite a lot of business owners as well. So if I start there, typically with business owners, it's this really interesting journey of as they're having time out, the team is stepping up. They're getting the realization that actually they didn't need to be all the things to all the people. So it leads to quite a big shift for the role that they play in their business. And quite often they end up with a business that's ultimately began to run itself, that's created headspace for a passion project and that thing that they'd always wanted to work on. So that's always a really fun journey from a business perspective, because you do have the control to change a lot when it's your own business. On the corporate side of things, my typical client has actually, a lot of them have stayed doing similar things. They've come to the conclusion that they've enjoyed what they were doing. It's just they've ended up in an environment that's not right for them at this point in time. They've shifted companies, sometimes industries. But yeah, I have had the odd client where actually they've done the assessment where they are is quite good, and it's just been a case of something's had to shift in their specific role and how they were showing up in it, and then it's worked out really well for them. So it's quite an individual journey. And then I've had people that have completely shifted in the way that I have. Kind of, yeah, it was that moment that they realized actually they were on a path that wasn't right for them at all, and this was the moment to shift.
So kind of walking through that trajectory of that wounds to wisdom to wealth, or, you know, our conditioning to realizing that we get to create our conditions, you know, consciously, and then moving from that space onward. You mentioned business owners that have like, well, it's my environment, I can shift this. And actually that realization that who I am is creating the environment for everyone else. And when I step out of that, there's a lot of trust required there. There's a lot of surrender. There's a lot of letting go. There's a real kind of death energy, isn't there? To be able to pull back and then trust your babies or your executives or whoever it is to run that, and actually see, like you said, that is okay running on its own, and you can now grow into your passion project. Talk to us about how you then started to feel when you were in that space. So your passion project, you're like, oh, I can help people with burnout. Like, how did that start? How did that piece become born?
Yeah, it started from an early stage of me realizing that I had burnout, because my brain is just wired to look for kind of ways things can be done better and where there's gaps. And I realized there was this huge gap in helping people understand burnout. At that point, I was focused on the kind of gaps in the recovery process. And then later on, I realized actually prevention actually would be nice to get started with, so it doesn't even happen. So I, through my own experiences, realized how much of a gap there was. And I remember kind of vowing that one day when I was out the other side, I'd do something about it. Thinking I'd probably write a blog post or something that, I don't know, might help the odd person down the line, not realizing that it would actually evolve into this business that works worldwide from the spectrum of prevention to recovery. So it's all happened quite organically. And I think the big thing is I've just learned to trust myself. And when something has felt right, I've trained in it and trusted that it would all come together, which is a huge shift from the person I was in corporate, where everything was planned out, was measurable, was predictable. It's been a completely different shift in how I live and work.
So share with us how you live and work now. Like, who is this new woman who holds her own medicine? You know, as I said right at the beginning, it's like my medicine is inside of the wound, essentially, the burnout. I've gone into recovery. I'm now loving and looking after myself, and actually I'm able to love and look after others and show them how to do it too. So what is this like living as Emma Matthews now?
Yeah, it feels like a really deep, delicious breath in and out. It's like I can breathe again. And I just feel so content, so in alignment now, in a way that I wouldn't have been able to even imagine what that felt like when I was in the corporate world, because I'd never experienced it. There was so much going around my head every day, and I was just living with chronic stress in those days. Whereas now I feel just much more aligned. Yes, there's still challenges, but actually I love the work that I do. And I am one of those annoying people that kind of talks around it doesn't feel like work when it's your passion. And it's so meaningful to me to help other people not go through what I went through, or if they're there already, to come out the other side with more support, and to, as far as possible, turn it into a positive, meaningful experience. Because I know what happens if you don't get the support, and at the kind of worst end of it, depression can spiral, and it's very, very serious. So it's like night and day to the life that I lived before. I see family, I sleep, I have time with my husband. It's really lovely.
It's gorgeous to see and feel that, and on this side, to know that there's this journey that you're walking, and although sometimes we meet things that we don't understand, and they can feel like the end, they can feel like everything I've known has now gone, and I cannot continue in this way, that there is something on the other side, and that, like you said, there is meaning in that moment. There is meaning if you allow yourself to find it, if you're open enough to receive it and curious enough. And that doesn't always happen straight away, because there's a lot of grief and internalized, like, what's going on? But like this medicine that you hold now, for how I see it anyway, how I experience it, for these people that are or have been driven by that external success, driven by that external recognition, and that recognition meant success and vice versa. But like we said at the beginning, got there and it's like, there's something missing for me, and if I'm not addressing the missing will address me. And so give us the idea, the vision now, from where you are, from what you've experienced on this journey, from what you've experienced in the stories and the recoveries of the people that you work with. What's the next step, kind of as a bigger narrative for us all to understand burnout, to prevent burnout? What's the energy, what's the kernel that we need to understand?
I feel like it's a journey of just remember. I keep coming back to this, but just remembering who you are and what you want from life, which changes over time. But we need to create the space to ask that question regularly and be brave enough to make the changes. Otherwise, one day you wake up and suddenly you're living someone else's life, and your body can respond to that in quite a physical way if we're not listening to it along the lines. But we've all got that knowing within us of actually what we want, what's right for us. And the more that we can create space, whether it's working with a coach or in some other way, to regularly tap into that, burnout doesn't need to happen. And then on the business side of things, very much my message is the most profitable, most successful businesses put their people first. Once you help them to understand themselves and make sure there is that alignment with who they are as people, what they want, and the mission of the company, burnout doesn't come up as well. I love working on that side of things as well, in the prevention sphere. And actually my clients that really care about their people, they're absolutely smashing it. The economic conditions that we're facing at the moment, it's not a concern in the same way it is for some other businesses. So I love that. I absolutely love that. And that's one of my favorite things also, to see that businesses, we think of business as like this hard energy, and actually
a business is just made of people, and people in relationships with other people. And, you know, we've often heard it, you know, through any sales course or wherever you are, like, people buy from people. Yes, of course they do, but because they're in relationship. And a lot of the time, I've definitely experienced it, I'm sure you have, that we've had interactions or bought from people that potentially we didn't really want the product or the service, but we enjoyed the experience of being with that person. And potentially that actually brought the service or the product to life for us. And I love that. I really love that as a message, that when you start loving yourself properly, looking after yourself properly, you are going to care about those other people in your business. If you're paying somebody to do a role for you, to be in a job for you, you should love them. You know, you should care about them and their well-being. And of course, we understand now this heart resonance, this energy, that when we're in relationship with these people, when we've got empathy, when we've got compassion, when we understand it because we've been through it, we're able to gift that energy. And I'd love to know your take on kind of like the energetics of that. You know, we've both been in a similar environment where energetics was a big conversation. What do you experience inside of that business sphere now for those people that maybe are only just coming to the conversation of energetics?
Yeah, it was something that took me a while to get my head around, because I was trying to understand it logically, but then I could see, I could feel attractive energy. So I knew there was something there. So I've just written how I kind of reconcile it in my mind is, I've got responsibility for my own energy to make sure I'm okay. And then I just trust that that attracts people who are in alignment with working with me. Mm-hmm. Versus say the version of me that would have wanted the project plan and the all of the steps that we're going to bring the clients. And I've actually realized it's much deeper than that, and it's quite freeing. For me, it feels like some of the magic in business, that it's not all logical. It is sometimes just around setting intentions, taking really great care of yourself, you being that, I guess, to some degree, role model, or kind of living the messages that you preach, and then people come that are in alignment with that. And it's a really beautiful thing. I find now that I just immediately know when it's right to work with someone or not. You can feel it, whereas previous version of me would have wanted the kind of the checklist, and you just know it's energy.
It's amazing, isn't it? Particularly as women with this interest in business, but also an interest in business that is for a purpose. You know, it's not just transactional. It's not just for the outcome. There's this new wave, you know, we've seen this feminine energy of entrepreneurship that is exactly as you've said. Yes, we understand the strategy. We know how to build certain models and to follow certain funnels, etc. But there's a magic, there's a key, there's an underlying sense of connection. And when we address that in ourselves, first and foremost, we're able to, like you said, distinguish who's going to work, who's not going to work. I can already see that because I can feel it. And we can only feel that to the level of which, you know, we allow ourselves to feel ourselves. And so what do you see occurring in the future for your medicine, for your brand, for, you know, for what you get to create? What's the vision of Emma Matthews moving forward?
Yeah, it's a really great question, actually. So last year was all about expansion for me. I was aware that I had ways of working with clients that were really, really working, but I was working with people one-on-one, and I realized that there was only so far my energy could go. So last year I started to go into kind of master classes, masterminds as a program. So yeah, I could support more people in different ways. And it's interesting, when I was thinking about what my intention is for this year, it's actually not a big leap in how I'm doing things. It's more actually focusing on joy in all of those processes is what was, or kind of relationships was coming for me. I love the business that I have. It feels right in this format at the moment. And I just want to be really intentional about doing it in joyful ways, because so much of burnout is dark, it's hard, it's scary. And actually, if you can bring the joy to doing this work, both at the prevention and the recovery ends of the spectrum, there's a magic in that, because our minds want to move us to joy and pleasure. So yeah, it's you could argue it's very kind of wishy-washy, but to me it's incredibly meaningful to follow that theme, and actually to lean back to a little bit and see what unfolds this year, rather than having this plan for lots of new structures. So I'm excited.
I feel that. And of course, here, nothing like that is wishy-washy. We love, we love the joy. We love the joy. And isn't it amazing that we have come full circle from, you know, I look at like the ancestral patterns in our parents and our parents before us, this big industrial movement, you know, towards create more, bigger, better, faster, move forward, you know, and to a certain extent we've been brought into that energy, and it feels like there's a crest of a wave now where more of us are becoming aware that it's not bad, but it's not sustainable. And actually, when we look at what sustainable energy is, it comes from the heart. It comes from this welling up within us. You know, we see the most successful entrepreneurs are those that are happy and healthy. You know, they really do look after themselves, and they make no bones about it. And I think there's an old ideology that that's selfish, when actually it feels like it's self first, and actually that self first propels. Yeah. And it's like this secret key, and it is joy. There is joy there. And sharing that with those that are out there feeling that burnout, that there is magic on the other side. But it does take a slow down. It does take those questions that you asked, you know, is this in alignment with what I want? And oh my gosh, can I be brave enough? Because it takes bravery. You know, not everyone is going to have a panic attack in the office and have to stop. Some people have to make that choice consciously, and that can bring up energies of guilt and shame. And, you know, that can make us feel like there's never going to be joy on the other side. So for those people that are listening, that are resonating with this story, that understand, oh my gosh, I don't need to read Arianna Huffington. I'm listening to, you know, Emma Matthews here, and her story is super resonating with me. What message have you got for those people?
Trust yourself. If something's not feeling right, lean into it, ask the questions, whether you do that work on your own or held with someone who's trained to support you with it. Because I always think, when I'm old and grey, looking back on my life, what is it that I want to think and feel about this period of my life? And that for me is such a powerful lens when I'm making decisions. And I've just realised that every time I've trusted myself and I've made the decisions based on actually the life that I want to build, amazing things have happened, versus when you're kind of settling in an environment that you know is not right for you. That takes a toll over time. You have regrets. I just think live life the way that you want to remember it.
I love that. Live life the way you want to remember it. And we get to choose that in every moment. We get to choose that in every moment. I'm so thrilled to have this conversation. I experienced burnout, but I didn't know it was burnout. You know, I experienced for me, it was, I'm holding too much, and now I feel ashamed that I am not able to hold that. And I've made promises that I'm going to hold that. And the promises externally and internally crumbled my identity, made me feel like I wasn't good enough. It kind of brought me back into my wound, essentially, of I'm not good enough. And I tried, like you know, opening the laptop on the, I will do some work from home, it's fine. You know, I tried to keep going and to sort of shift the narrative around what I was feeling and be like, it's okay, I can take you on this journey. I know how this feels. And it's, you can't necessarily externalize that. You can't outsource the burnout journey. You've got to bring it back in. You've got to say, I have to look after me. And when you do, it does mean that you must release a lot of the ideas that you had that other people held for you, whether that be parents, spouse, you know, children, inside corporate bosses, and the idea that you had for yourself. And it feels like inside of doing that, and certainly my experience anyway, inside of doing that, something gets revealed. Another version of you, another identity, like a resurrected version that's got this deeper meaning, like you mentioned, you know, it has to hold some meaning. If it doesn't, then why does all of this exist anyway? And I love that you've shared this journey, because just listening to you, it's definitely resonated with me. It resonates with the spiritual aspect of which I look at, you know, the heart comes first. And it doesn't have to be wrapped in that language. It can be any language. But as a human being, I love that you've shared that journey of, God, it was courageous to say, actually, I'm going to create something from this. She can do it. I can do it. And I'm really, really thrilled to have had this conversation with you, because, well, where do people find you? Where, if they're resonating with this conversation, where do they go?
Yeah, so a few different places. The place that I love to hang out is my Instagram stories. So that's where I'm most active, at Emma Matthews _coaching. Had to think about that one. And then my website is defeatburnout.com, where I've got tons of resources. If you want to be pointed in a specific direction, if you email me at emma@defeatburnout.com, me or my team can point you in the right direction.
That's so cool. It's so cool. Thank you so much for being here. I would like everybody to go and follow you on Instagram, because even if you don't think you're experiencing burnout now, there will be a lot of information on there that will just trigger you into a little bit more self-care, a little bit more understanding. And there's questions on there that are really good questions, just to, like you said, realign yourself with where it is that you are moving forward, so that you can be your own medicine. And I love the impact that you are having in the world, Emma. It's beautiful. You are sunshining. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I've absolutely loved the conversation.
Mwah.